Hello, everybody. I'm Tania. This is the last panel of this festival. This is All Statues Must Fall, and we're going to talk about the conflicts and iconoclasm in the public space. And we will do with Daniela Ortiz. She's a Peruvian artist and activist as well, and Yann Legal. He's an activist and researcher from Berlin Postkolonial, sorry. And they will do has a presentation of their works, and I hope we can have some space to debate and for questions. But first of all, I would like to do a little introduction about this space. I would like to thank Jen Hackel and as well Luper Garcia. She's from Goethe Institute from Barcelona. For the confidence of our works when we met in Barcelona 1 year ago. Then it seemed that the debate was in the sidelines because, how to say, there's no one talking about these statues and monuments. It was a debate in academia in specific places of thought. But since the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent worldwide demonstrations in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, the discussion about historical monuments has been rekindled. And I think it's interesting to have this debate 1 year ago, and it's interesting to think that the work that these activists are doing is for something, no, for the change. Because the iconoclasm in the public space is emerging, and the conflicts for restitution, collective memory, and the agency are part of our present. Today, many people, academics, politicians, activists, artists, journalists, and the general population wonder if all statues should fall because the ghosts of slavery and colonialism are still present in our public sphere in Western and global cities. Today, we start this festival in the museums and we finish in the streets, in our public spaces. I say our because we are all citizens of these democratic societies. I suppose because they are democratic, we can decide what happens in our public spaces and we can demand can demand that the colonization of these public spaces as well. Because the public spaces express the dialogue between the public administration as the legal owner of the territory of the nation and the citizens who exercise the real use of it and give them the character of public domain. I think we can all think about what happens then. However, I think this is a beautiful description and as well as a fiction because the institutional basis of this legal owner are racist and the domain of the land and the guarantees of these uses, they exercise the colonial power and represent the symbolic of white supremacy. An emotional and tense public debate is taking place, which they are accused of erasing history of those who asked for revision and reparation, but they did not understand that this is a battle against a single collective memory. This conflict also highlights the need of Europe to control all narratives, in the public space through characters who participate in colonialism and slavery, and their presence reinforces racist discourses, promoting the idea of inferiority of part of its population. For finish this little presentation, I would like to highlight the key question in relation of monumental destination. What must be done? Resignify, remove, destroy the statues in the exercise of decolonizing the public spaces? Sorry, I make a parenthesis. Sorry about maybe my English. I feel sometimes so uncomfortable because my language is Spanish, but continue. What we have to do, resignify, remove or destroy the statues. The Mayor of London, Sakit Khan, has announced that the City Council will create a commission that review the streets and monuments to reflect the diversity of the city and eliminate those related to slavery. The question is, they will work in an open cooperation with experts from the diaspora in this exercise of removal the statues and resignify the streets. On the other hand, in Barcelona, the City Council has removed the statue of the slaver Antonio Lopez. Today, the square is an empty space. The question that arises is what to do with the space without the statue. And what happens with these statues? What is the destination? Is a museum or it's a distraction? In the case of distraction, of solution is a distraction of the statues, the thing we have to think about is about these strategies I have beyond the iconoclastic of destroying these images. Should the public administrations destroy, or this is an act of the collective anti-racist act? In that case, how to act against the violence that activists are receiving? Daniela Ortiz, that she's with us, recently had to leave Spain after receiving threats. The existence of status is violent and represents the racist violence. The threats against activists are violent. However, the anti-racist movements are accused of violence and they act on public space. With this little introduction, I hope that understands what I'm trying to say. I give the word to Yann and his presentation. We're gonna stay with him maybe 50 minutes, and then we're gonna pass to Daniela, and after these presentations, we're gonna have a little debate and discussion. Yann, please.
Thank you, Tania. Obrigado.
Thank you for the organization. Thank you to the team as well. I won't pretend to represent Berlin Postkolonial because there are many people active in this organization, which started in 2007. But my presentation will rather show what has happened in Berlin and in other spaces until now regarding statues, renamings, and but also regarding performances and protests. And I will advocate for a kind of new politics of remembrance, that this is a project that is ongoing here in Berlin, and I can talk about it also in the discussions later. So what I want to underline is one thing. I will not talk about iconoclasm because I'm not really comfortable with that term, especially because it has been used during the colonial era to qualify how missionaries and soldiers were destroying graves and local symbols of religious value on the African continent, in the Indian subcontinent, in the Pacific, and in the Americas. And I don't think that this term is suited for this anti-racist history in the making today. So I want to start with the presentation. On the left-hand side, you can see an example of this kind of crystallized colonial memory. So a statue, the statue of the Prince Elector of Brandenburg, who is considered as the pioneer of German colonial aspirations, because in 1682, he sent ships to build a fort on the coast of what is today's Ghana, and started enslaving Africans. And the Brandenburgers then shipped those enslaved people over the Atlantic to the Caribbean, and they brought them also to Berlin and Potsdam, where they were forced to serve at court. And this is actually the first African presence here in Berlin and Brandenburg. But this history is not contextualized. The statue is now standing in front of a palace here in Berlin, and there's no information on this kind of history. And the other kind of memory that I want to look at is this kind of vivid anti-colonial memory. And on the right-hand side, you can see a march or a protest taking here, and this takes place every year in late February on the anniversary of the end of the Berlin Conference. So this conference, which took place in 1884, 1885, where European powers divided the African continent without any representatives of African populations. And on this day, on the 25th of February every year, activists, and here in the middle you can see Kwesi Aikens, who is one of the leading figures of this ritualism, of this march as well, ask and call for a memorial to be erected for the victims of European imperialism. But the fact that the memorial is not there yet, the march is like a kind of ritual. Every year this march takes place, and every year different sides of German colonialism are being tackled in the public sphere. And so what organizations here advocate is a shift of perspective in the writing of history and in urban semiotics, so in urban symbols and language. So in Berlin, it has already started with street names. And in the last 2 years, it's pretty interesting because district councils have voted for the renaming of 4 streets that have until now honored German colonialists, soldiers, and entrepreneurs. This is Nyakasuru Rumboro, one of the founders of Berlin Postkolonial, holding a street that will soon be renamed here in Berlin. And of these 4, on top of that, there's a 5th street, which includes a racist term that has been used to define Black people from a white German perspective. And this street will also be renamed, and this has been decided at the end of August. And the new names, and this is the shift of perspective, the new names will honor anti-colonial figures and movements. And here we have the Maji Maji War, which was a movement which started in 1905, where more than 20 groups in Tanzania rose against German colonial oppression. So there is a shift of perspective here. And all these renamings will also be accompanied by information boards that not only tell about the history of the former name and the new name, but also document and inform on the relevance of this shift of perspective. But the problem is that enough? Is a new name or a new statue or an empty space enough, or does it have its limits? Audre Lorde has once wrote that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And if statues of colonialists have tried to become, and as Achille Mbembe has said, indelible traces of conquest that resurrect the monsters of history, then is the solution to build new indelible traces that might also be toppled up by, is it enough to achieve a full decolonial dismantling of memory politics? And I ask this question especially because institutional racism is still present, especially because racial profiling still occurs, and because there's a growing backlash of right-wing discourse in mainstream politics in Europe, in the US, but also in Brazil, for example. And that always poses the threat of a kind of memory wars and conflict. So what are other ways of remembering that might be also productive? And activists haven't understood that even since the 1980s and 1990s. And many of them offer many other tools or practices that deconstruct, that topple, that reclaim and relate colonial history. Here we have a guided tour by Calvin Soares and Jar, who led us during that workshop in Brussels through colonial traces in Brussels. And I think that it is important that urban memory politics take into account not only the places and their history, but also the people and their stories. And present-day activists and artists are at the forefront to make their voices and their histories heard. And it is high time cities acknowledge and support these embodied and ritualized practices of remembrance. So we had the march at the beginning, the Memorial March, but we have also storytelling, guided tours, and performances. And here I can only refer to Grace's contribution earlier in that conference. And these embodied practices take place out in the open. They actually occupy the space, and they like call upon passerbys that and tell them the history. So if I may borrow the title of a project that has been organized by Berlin Postkolonial for the recognition of testimony in memory politics, I think that white European society and white Europeans like myself need to, quote, just listen. Yaka Sururumboro relating how his grandmother would tell him stories about Tanzanian resistance to German colonialism in the Kilimanjaro region. Listen to Calvin Suarez and Jair linking the headquarters of international banks in Brussels to the brutal conquest of the Congo region by Leopold II. Listen also to Linda Porn, who draws from evidence of genocide in the writings of Bartolomeo de las Casas to unveil the violence that is concealed in the massive statue of Christopher Columbus in Barcelona, and who brings forward contemporary indigenous voices. Listen also to the flapping wings of Setembile Msezane, who did a performance of 5 hours during the removal of the statue of Cecil Rhodes in front of the University of Cape Town in 2015. Listen also to the sound of the bronze being thrown at the bottom of the Bristol Harbour, and listen also to the reactions of activists and writers such as Musa Okwonga, the reaction to the backlash that took place after this, and how he relates different contexts of racist violence from colonial memory or colonial history to Fortress Europe and structural racism in Europe. And so I think that all these interventions would rather tally with what Sarah Ahmed calls a communicative ethics. So a new modes of encounter and being able to get closer to the other. And this implies intimacy, and this implies closeness, and this implies listening, but also maybe hearing and also relating. And I quote her, "I do not think that listening carefully across the distance can be the basis for an ethics of communication in the context of postcoloniality. I think that an ethics that assumes distance at its point of entry fails to recognize the implication of oneself in the encounter and the responsibility that oneself has to the other that is narrating the history. And an ethical communication is about a certain way of holding proximity and distance together. So to get close enough to others to be touched by them." And in her book, she underlines the importance of testimonial speech and of witnesses intervening. And these encounters need to take place. They need to take place not only in museums, but not only in the streets, but also at school, in mainstream politics, and in the digital sphere. And when these encounters take place, also authority needs to be given to those non-white, non-European experts. And this has started in Berlin when the Berlin Senate entrusted a group of different organizations to draw a concept for decolonial memory politics in Berlin. And this project started last year, and it will run for the next 4 years, hopefully with like guided tours, information boards, but also different ways, like open spaces also where people just discuss. Yeah. And finally, I come to the end, and I wouldn't do justice to Sarah Ahmed, Audre Lorde, Linda Porn, or Setembile Msezane if I did not address the question of gender and intersectional discrimination in the urban landscape. So let me finish with what Msezane says when she was asked to comment on her performance. And this observation can also be extrapolated to Berlin, Brussels, Barcelona, Bordeaux, Bristol, and it should be redressed. She said, "South Africa's memorialized public spaces are barren of the Black female body. So last year, I started doing performance art to draw attention to the issue and to bring like the Black female body, to make it visible in the public sphere." And at the end, she says, "I'm not sure that we need statues at all. It's a colonialist thing. It's like marking territory, which is very much a patriarchal, I think, patriarchal tradition." Yes.
And the question is, they must fall. They aren't. space.
Obviously they must fall, but the question is, what do you do with the space afterwards, you know? And this is why I wanted to show like different examples of how activists engage with the space already before the toppling of the statues. Thank you, and I'm really looking forward to Daniela's
yes, I don't know. I
presentation.
can see Daniela. I don't know. She.
I'm here.
Are you here? Ah, okay, Daniela.
Yeah.
I cannot see you. Okay,
Yeah.
it's because I'm starting to talk with Yann because I'm not able to see you. Okay, Daniela, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks, Tania. It's really nice to see you here, even though it's digital, but it's cool to be in this space. And nice to meet you, Yann. And thanks to the people like Yann and Lupe that organize, and all the other people like Federica and everybody else who organize this space. I'm going to make a short introduction to just make let's say an introduction to the perspectives that not only myself but other anti-racist militants or anti-colonial and anti-racist collective have in regard not only to monuments, because and now I'm going to start sharing my images, and let me know if you can see them. Just a sec. Compartir pantalla. Yeah. Can you see them? I hope. Yeah? Yeah, okay. So I think it's really important to understand that in a way, monuments, because precisely they occupy public space, are the most visible symbols of reivindication of colonialism and imperialism in the national identities, not only of European countries, because we can see, for example, and I'm not going to address that now, but I think it's really important also to think and revisit all the national identities of the so-called independent republicas, which are not, in the context, for example, of Latin America here, which are independences built by criollo white people that incorporate a lot of these colonial symbols, which I'm not going to address today. But it's also really important to see symbols such as, for example, the coat of arms of Spain, which has the plus ultra. And this coat of arms is not, let's say, something that is left from the past. Actually, it's a coat of arms that was designed and changed in 1986 by the PSOE, the left wing of that time, after the dictatorship, when Spain had a symbol, let's say a symbol in the coat of arms that had to do with the Franco's dictatorship. And it's really interesting that in 1986, and with a left wing and supposedly progressive party, they take the decision to go back to 1492 and not only put the plus ultra, which has to do with the trip of Columbus, but also, for example, when they changed the National Day of Spain from the 18th of July, they changed it to the 12th of October, even though they had a whole debate in regard to putting the 6th of December, which is the day of the Constitution, as a national day. But in democracy, in this white democracy, which is white supremacy democracy, and with this white left wing, they take the decision to go back to 1492, not only in that, but also, for example, in the passport of Spain designed in 2011, that they took the decision to put a symbol of the trip of Columbus, precisely in one of the bureaucratical and institutional tools, which is the passport, that recreates and reinforces the contemporary racism imposed in the European context through nationalities, because racism now doesn't only work in regard to the color of skin, which is, let's say, the major way of attack, but they also use, for example, the nationality itself, in the context of Spain, we have 14 monuments to Columbus, obviously streets to Pizarro, to Cortés, etc. And here I think it's really important to question for who are important these monuments, not only what it means for the anti-racist, anti-colonial movement, for migrant and racialized people, for the global South. What does it mean, those colonial monuments, for white supremacy? Why they insist in making this type of reivindications in the passport, in the National Day, in the streets? in the streets, because what they want is to recreate the position, let's say, of the indigenous guy that is at the bottom of the Columbus monument on his knees in front of a white person who is a priest, no? And this is what they want us to, let's say, to respect, this type of relationship, no? Also, I think it's really important to understand the moment in which this type of monuments are built. In the case of the Columbus Monument of Barcelona, which is a really important symbol, not only because it's still it is still there, because as we will see then, it is a symbol that is alive, and that the city and the citizens of Barcelona, the white citizens, make it to be alive. This monument was built in 1888 during the Universal Exhibition of Barcelona. In these universal exhibitions, and there is a really interesting research work by Francisco Godoy in regard to this, to see these universal exhibitions as a colonialism tool. Not only these symbols of progress, development, like the Eiffel Tower, like the Atomium, like the Arc de Triomphe in Barcelona. Ciao, Inti, my son is leaving. Anda a comer un helado. Yeah, and I'm sorry, but he was leaving. And not only these this symbol of progress, development, of civilization were built, but also the so-called human zoos, which were not like, let's say, freak shows, as now white people want to narrate them. They were part of all these display of what is European identities, no? That included the reivindication of colonial symbols such as Columbus, the Eiffel Tower, but also the exhibition of people that were basically kidnapped from the Global South territories to be exposed. How these symbols are still alive, like for example, in the context of Barcelona, is the Columbus Monument is not dead stone, no? You have even the pride, and that's when our friends from, for example, the Colectivo Ayu say, no, lo queer no te quita lo racista, the queer doesn't take away from you the racist, no? And even the pride of Barcelona has the eye with the Columbus symbol. And then, for example, the Barcelona football team put the T-shirt to Columbus in a reivindication way. The Metro tickets have Columbus in a way in its tickets. Then also, for example, the Comic Salon of Barcelona has put several times Columbus as a superhero. And then, for example, we have La Merced, which is the party of the city of Barcelona. And in one of the recent signs with the left wing, with Ada Colau and Barcelona en Comú in the government, they took the decision to tattoo the Columbus monument as a symbol of the city in the girls' representation. And then we can see how this type of colonial reivindications that reinforces the institutional racism that migrant and racialized people live, and that the need to keep that monument not only clean and on its feet, but like to keep it alive, is the need to keep alive those speeches that let the governments, that the institutions have immigrant detention centers, persecution of migrant and racialized people, deportations, exploitations, and killing in border areas, no? Other case which is interesting is the Plaza de los Escubrimentos, the Plaza of the Discovery in Colón, that is from the 1970s. I am not going to go deep on that, but the opening of that plaza was really interesting because different mayors from Latin American cities, obviously all of them white, all of them representing the criollo power in the context of Latin America, were invited to the opening of the Plaza of the Descubrimientos, and what they did was to bring earth, soil, from those territories in order to honor Columbus during that opening that obviously was carried out by the King and Queen of Spain. And why it's important, for example, to see how alive is this plaza. It is one of the main places used by the extreme right party, Vox, in order to do their political events. And every time they have a really important political event, they use this plaza. And it's not casual. It's because they are reivindicating all what Columbus means the imposition not only of colonialism, exploitation, and death in the global south, but also the imposition of capitalism and the imposition of patriarchy. No? But then it's also interesting to see that the Plaza de los Escubrimentos, where the Columbus Monument of Madrid is also used the 12th of October during the celebrations, where, for example, mayors as Manuela Carmena, that supposedly was a left-wing or what we call white left-wing, attended to say hi to the Queen to the King and the Queen, and obviously to reivindicate the 12th of October. No? And then we can see here, what does it mean, the Columbus Monument of Madrid? That means all that to the extreme right wing, to the white left wing. What does it mean to the anti-racist and anti-colonial movement? This was an intervention done last year by a group of anti-racist and anti-colonial militants. Actually, I'm sorry, this year, no? And it was a symbolic intervention. And I think also it's really important, and then I will go deeper on that, to problematize the reaction of certain, let's say, progressive, white left-wing politicians or political groups in institutions in regard to these monuments. Tania was mentioning the removal of the monument to the colonial businessman Antonio López y López in Barcelona, that was carried out by Barcelona en Comú, carried out at the same time that Barcelona en Comú was defending and imposing the policy of persecuting street sellers, mostly from Senegal and from Gambia, that was in a way one of the strongest way of reinforcing racism in the city of Barcelona, to do not only recreate once and again the image of white police persecuting black people, but also to have a white left wing defending that policy and imposing that policy, when at the same time they were carrying out the removal of the monument, which is quite similar, for example, to the removal of the Columbus Monument in the context of Argentina. And why it's important to be critical with this type of removals? Because in the case of Antonio López y López or Columbus, these monuments were being taken out with all the respect, with all the protocols, and taken and preserved in a museum. And actually, sometimes I do think it is a way of preserving those colonial patrimonies for not being attacked by anti-racist and anti-colonial groups. In the case of Argentina, for example, it was removed from a main area in front of the government house of Argentina, and then it was replaced by the Juana Zurduy, an indigenous fighter against colonialism monument that was a gift actually by President Evo Morales. But then, as the monument was not teared down, the monument was in a deposit. So when the right wing appeared again in Argentina, they took the Columbus monument again out and they put it in front of the sea in another area, and at the same time they removed the Juana Zurduy monument. So, for example, the same happened with the Pizarro monument in the context of Lima. It was in the, let's say, main plaza, but it was removed to another part. That's not a decolonial or anti-colonial strategy. That's a strategy for preserving colonialism when the discussion about the abolition of all these symbols happens, no? Actually, this is quite recent, and it was the other day we were having a public discussion also with Kerly Garavito, that is an Afro-descendant activist, anti-racist activist in Lima, and she was explaining how, for example, precisely for this 12th of October, the City Council of Lima took the decision to make a whole, let's say, cleaning of the Columbus monument, but also what they did, they covered it. So nobody could, the groups that were organized in order to attack that monument couldn't attack it because it was covered. Something that happened also this 12th of October and the 12th of October before in Barcelona, that all the statues from the bottom of the Columbus monument of the city were covered like if they were being repaired. No? So they are also using this notion of preserving patrimony in order to protect those monuments for being attacked, for going through the process that they should go like what happened in 1992 in Chiapas, that it was not in any moment. It was in a moment where the Zapatista people were getting organized. This was 2 years before the uprising of the Zapatistas in 1994, and it was precisely on the 12th of October when Spain was celebrating the Quinto Centenario with the Olympics, with the exhibition of Sevilla and all these events. In the context of Mexico, for example, in Chiapas, the monument of Diego de Mazariego was destroyed. And here I think it's really important not only to see that the visual action creates history, the fact that there was a political organization that took the decision to tear down those monuments, and the image of humiliation and of violence against those colonial symbols is really important, because that's what creates history. Not when you remove a monument with all the care and all the and put it in another museum, or you put a plaque that you try to explain in a critical way that monument, no? And then also I think it's really important to see that when this process is happening, it's because there are huge collective processes going on that are not only approaching the racism of the monuments, they are approaching a struggle and a fight against the whole violence of the capitalist, colonial, and patriarchal system, like in the case of Chiapas in 1992. And as I say, it was a moment before the uprising of the Zapatistas. And this happened in Morelia the same year, at the same moment in 12th of October, that the monument to a viceroyal, Spanish viceroyal was tear down. And then in Mexico City also, they tried to tear down the Columbus monuments, which was not due to the police and everything. It was not possible. And then we can see now that monument being removed by the authorities of Mexico City, which happened just before the 12th of October, because they were protecting it. It was not because they were doing an anti-colonial gesture. That's completely different to what happened in 2004 in the context of Venezuela, that also a group of people in the process of the Bolivarian Revolution took down the Columbus monument. That is not in a museum. That is like this monument should be as trash in the deposit of a union of workers in the city of Caracas. And then we can see that the process of tearing down monuments is not something recent from Black Lives Matter. It has been, let's say, a resistance, anti-colonial and anti-racist gesture that has accompanied bigger processes, bigger political processes. And why I say this? This is, for example, this was like a month ago that by a colonial monument was teared down by the NASA MISAC people in the context of Colombia. And these people have been organized for 500 years against colonialism. And then I wanted to show this, that, for example, in the context of the Black Lives Matter protest, not only colonial monuments are being targeted, it's also luxury stores and also the police, which is the state colonial racist force, and then we have the capitalistic force. No? So it's really interesting to see how, when this really managed to be done, is because there are huge processes going around. About the question of tearing them down, I think absolutely yes. This is what it needs to be done with these colonial monuments. And not only with these colonial monuments, but with the police and with all the racist institutions that have been inflicting violence historically against migrant racialized people and people from the global south. And talking precisely in the context of Europe, we don't need a removal of the immigration law, a reform of the immigration law. We need an abolition of the immigration law. We need an abolition of the migratory control system, and we need also a policy of reparation in regard to that. Like these monuments are falling, that system needs to fall, and a process of justice and reparation needs to be done to all the people that have been inflicted violence by that system, and also to see that this is already happening in Europe. In all the, even though the white left wing doesn't want to recognize as political acts, but in the context of the immigrant detention centers, how many protests how many times they have, for example, burned the immigrant detention centers. They have actually now, at the moment, there is a hunger strike in Murcia, I think, in Spain. And then how many times the asylum seekers have teared down and burned the centers where they are being detained, like, for example, in the context of Greece, where this picture was taken. And then also, I wanted to answer the second part of the question, if it's all the status must fall, no? That's another huge discussion, but I do think, in a way, let's say the material shape of the status in a colonial, let's say a colonial type of aesthetics, no? But then on the other hand, and I wanted to show this because, well, as Tania mentioned, I had to leave Spain recently because of my opinion in public TV in regard to the need to tear down those monuments. And I think that, let's say, the persecution and repression I received, that was not only threats by Twitter or simple messages, it was a whole information we got in regard of a group that was trying to open a criminalization process in the police. And my opinion in that media was risky and was attacked because all this collective situation was going on. If maybe, I don't know, like 20 years ago, I would have said something like that in Spain, nothing would have happened. But the risk is when collectiveness makes these processes happening. And I think that's what, because the reason why I received all this, because there is a huge fear by white supremacy to see in Europe what is going on in the States. And to finish with the question of if all the status must fall, well, if we're going to keep certain symbols of the aesthetics of European things, I would like to keep this one. That is a monument to Micaela Bastidas and Tupac Amaru, and their son, Fernandito Tupac Amaru. And it's a monument that is in Tinta, that is the city where the corregidor de Arriaga, that was an Spanish authority in the area, was killed after having a popular judgment during the anti-colonial rebellion in the area of Cusco, where I'm at the moment. And I'm, besides the whole situation I have lived recently, I'm really proud to be here. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm really thanked by the people that here have opened their arms to me and my son, and to receive us not only in the daily life situation, but also in a political way, because in these territories, resistance is happening, it's daily life, and it's real, no? In contexts like Tinta. But then we can have the whole discussion about colonial power in the Global South, but I'm going to stop there, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, Daniela. But I think it's interesting talk about the colonial power in Global South and the North and the Western. That is maybe it's not the same, and the strategies of the groups are different. I think it's interesting when we talk about public space and we talk about the public sphere. We need to know how are the strategies. And there is a thing that you speak about, I think it's interesting too, it's about violence. Because if I don't understand, if I understand well, you say that it's all the status must fall, they must fall with violence. Is that what you say, or is not?
But I revindicate violence in certain moments. I think when violence is a tool for defending your community and yourself from another violence is, let's say, legitima defensa, no? How do you say?
Self-defense. It's the self-defense. Like
okay. In the context of the Zapatistas, no? How they say we use the guns not to shoot them, but to protect ourselves, no? There was a similar strategy by the Black Panthers, for example. No, and it's really interesting that a strategic way of using violence, which is obviously completely different from white supremacy and the right wing, no? And in the case of colonial monuments, I don't even think it's violence. I think it's beautiful to see a colonial monument falling down and being teared down. And I think it's the most poetical act to have like a woman hitting the face of a colonizer with a stick, that is also in a symbolic way, no? In that case, for example, with my art, I love to, the possibility of making this kind of symbolic reparations against colonialism, because you can paint things, no? You can paint the policeman that destroy your life in the immigration office, burning down in the hell, no? But it's also something symbolic, no? So the problem is the real violence they are inflicting towards migrant and racialized people and people in the global south, no?
Okay, but if you doing violence, you are vulnerable, no? And as well, in your case, you have to go out of a country because of it's not your violence, but you express your opinion about this situation of statues, about the racist state in Spain, and how we can we can deal with that.
Yeah, I think like in my case, I had to leave because in the European context, in a way, is completely, let's say, the level of organization and resistance in the global south is huge. And the level of protection you have towards militants, activists, at the same time that the level of violence is really hard, no? You also have like big organizations that protect the people who are being part of those groups, no? And in a way, in the context of Europe, due to the fact that is the territory of the colonizer, let's say, is the heart of the empire, no? And due to having, sadly, quite racist white left wing and not having support from them, which was one of the reasons that I decided to leave also, no? Because I only had support from the anti-racist groups of migrant and racialized people, no? So what I think that is the process is political organization. We need to be organized. We need to have certain needed conversations with the white left wing and the anti-fascists that have been being called by the anti-racist movement for many years to take a position to see what's going on in the States. Not only because obviously Black Lives Matter is super strong and what's going on is huge, but also there is a support by the anti-fascist, and that's important. Strategically, it's really important to have it. No, so I think the way of protecting us in these processes is not to work alone, to work in an organized way to protect each other in those processes, which are really risky. No.
Okay. Okay, we have one question from, let me check, from Luisa Barbosa Cardoso. Luisa Barbosa Cardoso. And she's saying that the aggression that those monuments represent cannot continue to be accepted. But how to convince and appeal to all European governments that that action must be taken urgently, respecting the oppressed cultures that are living with us, sharing European territories. I don't know who want to answer this question.
Can you please repeat
Yann?
the last sentence?
Okay. She says that how to convince the European governments that action must be taken urgently, respecting the oppressed cultures that are living with us, sharing European territories. Mm-hmm. I think it's a question with a lot of...
I'm just going to bounce back on what Daniela was talking about. We need to be organized, and this is something that also answers this question. And we, like in the different organizations that form part of this Decolonize Alliance here in Berlin, we have had like several meetings and have several discussions on strategic work. Do you work with the institutions? Do you work inside the institutions? Do you work outside? Do you work with the anti-fascist groups? And the answer is you should work on all levels, and you should find a way of positioning pawns so that you manage to actually convince mainstream politics to go towards your goals. And I think that the role of artists, activists, and scientists or academics is really crucial. Like where I position myself is completely different than where Nyakasoro Rumboro is positioned, but we act together so that Berlin starts thinking, or like city councillors and politicians start thinking about removing statues and giving jobs also to people who have been active in that thing since the 1980s and who have never been supported on an institutional level and who only have like contract jobs to do trainings, etc. And I think that it's a long process, and it's a process that involves also civil disobedience and violence. And I think that Daniela Ortiz, your call for these actions, I love it. I think we should really act and topple statues. At the same time, who will act? And this is where like the question of strategy: who actually has the privilege to be able to topple the statue and not end up in jail, and who cannot do that, and who will be targeted for this? And these are many questions that I think organizations need to think through within and together. Like also talking to you, Daniela, and your experience in Spain is also different from the experience that we have in Berlin. It's different from the experience that Kafa Diallo has in Bordeaux. It's different from the experience in Brussels, but we can learn from each other so that it starts changing.
Daniela, you want to answer the question?
Yeah, I think I agree totally with you with the situation of working in all levels. Like it has to be not only like that. Let's say that the moment of the struggle in the public space is the final moment of super long processes. No, like. And we can see it, for example, with the Zapatista uprising. The uprising was 2 years after that, but the teardown of that monument was needed to do something such as strong as taking back a territory as the Zapatistas did, no? That had like work in that area since the 70s. Not well, obviously we're talking like of long resistances for 500 years, no? But in the short memory, we are talking about that, no? About the question, I don't think we have to convince European authorities. I think European authorities should be trial for all the crimes they are committing in border areas, in immigrant detention center, and during the processes of deportation, persecution of people, and exploitation of migrant and racialized workforce. And I really think we need to believe in that. We need to believe that justice has to happen. Let's say that the teardown of colonial monuments is a symbolic, no, but it's really important that I consider the first point of the agenda needs to be that all this violence needs to be stopped, and these people need to be judged. I don't believe in like let's say penitentiary justice and this type of justice. But I do believe in processes of popular justice, like the ones carried out in Kurdistan, like, for example, that they have their own way of organizing justice, like the ones carried out by the Mapuche people, like the ones carried out by the Nasa people, for example, or the Zapatistas. Or we need to think that this has to be done. And there, we are not going to convince European politicians. We are going to judge them. Because there is like the death of more than 50,000 people in the last 30 years. And that needs only not to stop, but we need to put Fabrice Leggeri, the director of Frontex, in front of an anti-colonial authority. We need to put all the Ministry of Interior for the last 30 years. We need to put Marlaska, who is at the moment in the left-wing government, and we need to put all the politicians that have been part of a process of deportation, detention, or death in border to trial, because we cannot leave this like this. It's like more than 50,000 people dead, and a lot of people that have lost everything. because a process of deportations means that you lost all the taxes you paid for many years in the context of Europe, and that these white people are going to use for their museums, and all cool with museums, but they are funded with the taxes of migrant people that are being illegalized and then deported. And there is, like, we really need to go through all this system of the last 30 years in the context of Europe, no?
Okay, I understand that you don't have to convince, you have to act. But if you don't have the power, how to act? This is the great question, because this, yeah, the little groups of anti-racist groups and these movements, they don't have enough power to change the things. It's just a point or a question if you want to answer, and I tell you the next question. How to act without power?
I think in 1936, during the Civil War in Spain, the monument of Antonio López y López, of Joan Well, and of Prim was teared down. And it was not only teared down because it was a monument that represented, let's say, white businessmen that were exploiting white people, because it also represented that other power. And I think we need to believe in those alliances that has happened in certain moments. That, for example, I don't know, I think of alliances of certain groups of Germany with Palestine, for example, no? Or alliances of, for example, Cuba with Angola, or this type of situations. And I think in 1936, for example, in the context of Spain, at least, there was a moment of having that possibility, no? But if there is no dialogue, if there is no space of work, if there is no, it's really complicated, no, to have that.
Okay, you say that create a tricontinental or internationalist against these powers in North,
or
something like
with
that,
the anti-fascists and the anti-racists, like what is going on in the States. It's anti-fascists and anti-racists who are, and actually yesterday there was a huge demonstration in Madrid that was anti-fascist and anti-racist against the attack to migrant minors in San Blas. So, and it worked pretty well, I think, no? And that's, if the anti-racist, we call like racist, the white left wing, is when they don't answer to this need of making this alliance.
Okay, the next question. I don't know who's are asking. Okay, I was wondering, in the addiction to the removal actions that maintaining the political scope of gesture without being instrumentalized and then neutralized, what kind of space there could be physical or even performative actions on monuments. Some examples have been presented. I'm also thinking, for example, about Maria Basura's Fucking the Fascism project, in which she uses sexuality to decolonize colonial and fascist monuments. I am more generally interested in understanding what can be done with those monuments, architectures that cannot be demolished, in order to cancel their political function and redefine it. I don't know, we can start to Yann.
Wow, that's a really tough question. So those alliances that can take place between anti-racist, anti-fascist, and Black and POC groups can, with Palestine, say, but should also take place within a nation with queer LGBTIQ groups as well. And especially because a lot of these groups have also a tradition and experience in occupying the public space and in making it queering it and making it uncomfortable, you know. And I feel that, especially in Germany, until now, what has happened, and this is a problem, is this: mainstream German society doesn't know anything about German colonialism. This has been not told at school. It's just starting to be in their history books. Those traces and those statues have never been questioned, but at the same time, there is a long tradition of queering the urban space and of queering history, especially in Berlin. And I think that I cannot talk, like, I'm not positioned that way. So I can only hope that we can develop those strategies so that we see how these groups and how these activists have claimed the space, and whether there can be a queer post-colonial feminist occupying of the space that can take place. But I cannot foresee this because I will not be the one doing this as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, in the sense that it's like patriarchal colonial capitalist system, no? The one that is like exercising all this type of violence in different levels, in different ways, but that they need each other, no? The question was what to do with the monuments if they cannot be torn down.
Yes.
Yeah, I think as the same thing that I was saying in regard to that, for having, for example, the Zapatista uprising, you need long processes. Those monuments, like for example, the action of Maria Basura, or different actions that have been carried out by artists, collectives against the Columbus Monument in Barcelona, for example, or other colonial monuments, are, let's say, the steps needed to prepare that final moment of tearing down a monument, no? Because that's something that doesn't happen from one day to another. And I think in the way of organizing, it's really important to have this, to do not think sometimes there is this like idealization of revolutions, and to think that happen from one day to another, and that there is not years and years and years and years of work and failing many times in those processes. So I think it's important to always that we have a final target, no, a long-term target that is not only to tear down the monument, but really to think on the possibility of abolition of the migratory control system in the context of Europe, no? And I do believe it when I see, for example, what happened in South Africa. Maybe who in the 1970s would have ever think that the apartheid would have ended? But people got organized. It was a lot of sacrifice, but it was abolished, no? And obviously the system reinvents itself. But I think also it's really important. Sometimes in Europe there is this feeling of that things are like this and nothing can be done, and we are going to cry because there is people dying in the sea, and then having all this type of okay, things are like this, if there was not a possibility of living another type of life. And that's something that Moira Millán from the Mapuche organization said in regard, for example, to Abya Yala, no? That in difference from Europe, she saw hope here, because here there are territories that are liberated at the moment. Like in Cauca, the police and the army in certain areas, they don't enter. They don't have power there. In the Mapuche territories, the police and the military, they are fighting, but they don't enter. And they have their own way of organizing economy, life, etc. No? So in a way, like, I think Europe needs that hope to see that maybe there is the possibility to escape from Europe itself, no? And maybe migrant and racialized people are the people who are going to give them a huge hand with that process.
With the hope. Okay, answering the question, there's no possibility of resignify the statue?
No.
No?
No. You can put so many layers on it. Those layers can always be like, you can put another layer and another layer and another layer, but the core of the matter is the thing that matters. And Daniela says you have to have the goal, like the last goal is not to have those statues anyway. And the last goal is to decolonize society. And this means that the statues are just only one step. And it's just only the visible tip of the iceberg. And
okay, the next question, I think it's interesting because maybe it's one step that Daniela mentioned it before about what happens with Antonio Lopez. This question says that in Goa, they already took the statues of Vasco da Gama and Alfonso de Albuquerque and showcased them in the Archaeological Museum. On the other hand, in Kolkata, you can still see the exhumation of past colonial rule in the British Raj in several monuments, like, for example, the Victoria Memorial, where in the entrance you can see an enormous statue of Queen Victoria. How to face this contrasense in the context of post-colonial studies?
Well,
okay.
can I go
Yann.
first?
Yes.
So first, these are two completely different contexts, and I can give you other contexts, like South Africa, for example, has been freed from the shackle of apartheid in 1996, but has not been freed from land expropriation until now, and the Rose Must Fall protests have only started stimulating a debate on who has the land, which is actually owned by by white South Africans, and this is a process that takes a long time, and this removal of statues is actually anchored in a specific context, which is not, which we can learn from it, but which is not applicable to other contexts. And the British Raj is another context, especially with the marginalized and with hatred against Muslims, and the Angolan context is another one. So I think what we can only do is look at these contexts and learn from the best practice, and that finds, say, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for example, in South Africa, which has been very much criticized because it wasn't law-abiding. So perpetrators could come and tell the story of having molested and killed Black people, and it was a kind of witness testimony on a national level, but with no consequences. And I think that Daniela, I think you would like consequences. You would like those people to be trialed. And so maybe this kind of model can be adapted to another model. And we can only learn from those different contexts, but we shouldn't try to put them on the same level and to see which one is best. I think, only time and hope will tell how to decolonize a given society. And
sounds a little bit religious, what you say, only time and hope.
Yes, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen on one, you're a fool if you think that you've renamed one street and then the work is done. No, because structures, to change structures, the bottom-up level is really important. So if you change something here, and if you change something here, and if you change something there, and if you change something there, then you might have a kind of structure that will be toppled. But then there are other structures on top of it, and so it's a long process.
Yeah. I think it's really important to be alert on the fact that the colonial system, as the patriarchal system or the capitalist system, are experts on reinventing themselves. Mm-hmm. Every time a resistance appears, they do all the work possible in order to deactivate it. Sometimes they obviously use force directly, but for example, let's see with green capitalism, no? It's a way of redirecting the support that we could have from the global north to the anti-extractivist movements in the context, for example, of Abya Yala, no? To have that support, they redirected to green capitalism. So they give you an answer. That's why last year was so big on this, because they needed to create a narrative in order to have people that are talking about the ecocide, but they're not talking about Berta Cáceres and why she was murdered, no? Because they are not going to allow that. So in that sense, I think there is a lot of work to be done, like, for example, to be alert how the City Council of Barcelona was manipulating the removal of a statue, not only to keep it safe from attacks, but also to resguard or protect the racism they were inflicting. And they were going to say, we are removing this colonial statue, how we are going to be racist when we are persecuting Black people in the street. Or we have shared the George Floyd demonstration image, how we are going to, that's only a strategy to keep racist imaginary working, no? And in that sense, I think the processes of justice that doesn't have to do with revenge, has to do with justice and reparation, which is different from revenge. And that's there was an activist from Black Lives Matter in an interview saying one day, white people are lucky that we are not asking for revenge and we are asking for justice and reparation, and not even sometimes even reparation, only for minimal justice, no? And in that sense, I think it's also a moment that we need to talk about these processes of justice, for not using the ones that power and colonial, patriarchal, and capitalist power have put on the table, because they are going to reward them and do and have situations like the one you mentioned in South Africa, have absolute impunity, even though, for example, here they also made a commission of reconciliation after the war in the 1980s. And then, for example, you see how clear they maintain the speech of terrorism that was imposed by the Fujimori dictatorship. And then you see, for example, how they erase the role of the Peruvian oligarchy in the debate, and how they manipulate the debate in regard to racism, for example, no? So I think in that sense, it's really important to be constantly alert, because it's a constant work. So to final, I don't know, like at least create another type of context for living, for at least living, because for some people this is a matter of life or death, no?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have just more comment or opinion, and says, until now you have not discussed yet about already damaged monuments, but only about monuments that have been honored until now. Alternatively, we could put the already damaged monuments up again and invite artists to deconstruct them step by step, and so to take them finally to their own counter monuments. I would think this would be more effective, meaning that we would not destroy the vestiges of European guilt, but to deconstruct them. What do you think about that possibility?
I am longing for this. In Potsdam, so we have just released an audio guide which takes you through the colonial traces of this city that is very Prussian and very imperialist, and it's showcasing of the world, showcasing China, showcasing the African continent, etc. And what we've done with that audio guide is we've asked some friends and colleagues and activists what they would do. And there's one square where you have like 4 black busts that are looking up to 2 white Romans. And we have asked for the renaming of this square for a long time, and this square has been renamed. But now the problem is that the representation is still here. The racist representation of blacks is still here. This kind of hierarchy is still there. And so the foundation of those Prussian palaces and gardens is saying, yeah, okay, we've renamed the rotary, the square. What do you want more? And this is where the voices from our colleagues say, why don't you, because Brandenburg has enslaved Africans in the 17th century, why don't you ask an artist from Ghana to come here and to do something with the busts, either destroy them or either do a complete other representation of Africans in that park. And we are waiting for this to happen. But the problem also with museums, public sphere, and especially in Europe, is that this colonial, patriarchal, capitalist system has 3 agendas. One is authenticity. It wants to keep the vestiges of the past and to show it again in this and again in the same manner, which I really don't understand. And then the second one is it wants obviously to celebrate its thinkers, mostly men. And here in that rotary, in that square, you've got like 2 Roman philosophers. And so this kind of like Europe comes from the Roman Empire and comes from its philosophers, which also I don't really understand, because Europe is not white and not anymore. And we have many thinkers that have contributed to the history of Europe that are non-white. And finally, capital is because this park is part of the foundation that actually makes money out of culture. And so, and the people that visit Potsdam want this, like, I don't know whether they want this, but I think that the foundation thinks that the people that visit Potsdam want this kind of like Prussian and this kind of like, yeah, you know, palaces and gardens and busts, etc. And it doesn't tally with their thinking to have a contemporary artist destroying the place. Whereas I think it is what should happen.
Daniela?
Yeah, I don't know if I wanted to share a couple of images. Can I try it if it works?
Yes.
Yeah, I will see if it works. Just a second. Because actually recently there is a Instagram profile called Monumentos Incómodos, and it's really interesting. They are just posting constantly images and processes in regard to monuments. And yesterday they posted this. Just a sec, that I put this. I don't know if we can see it. Just a sec that I go to the end of this. And they posted this image that during the revolts, the recent revolts in the context of Santiago de Chile, the colonial monument was not intervened, but was painted all red. That was aesthetically even, like, I think, really beautiful. Just a sec that I share to see if it shares. Yeah, now you can see it. Yeah, so they not only painted it all red, but they also, I think it's really important to see the image of the flag, no, which is a colonial symbol in the sense of these republicas that, as I mentioned before, are the continuation of the colonial system and not a rupture with it, with the faces, for example, of Camilo Catrillanca and the logo of the Mapuche, no? And what happened the next day with this? The next day, it was all painted like really fast, no, and erased, because even you can leave this kind of intervention, like, for example, what happened in the monument in Caracas. When they tear down the monument, they left the bottom part like that, painted and all intervened for many years until they built another monument of an indigenous person, but that place became a central point for all the protests during the 12th of October in the context of Caracas. So then you are building another symbol, no? And in the case of what is called actually officially Plaza Italia, but now is being called Plaza de la Dignidad, no? There is a dispute with this monument and to leave it with revolt. And in that case, I wanted to mention a proposal that I made for a monument in New York. They invited me to propose a monument in New York. So I started from the racist monument at the door of the Natural History Museum, that has Roosevelt on top of a horse, dressed up, and then there is a black person and an indigenous person semi-naked, like holding him up. And my proposal was to make this other monument that erases the white person from the scene, and people are resting, like finally resting after all the violence inflicted by them. And then also for me, it was really important to include the horse in that moment of leisure after the struggles, that at the bottom of the proposal have each area, there are 4 areas, have a representation of anti-colonial revolts in the North American context, no? And then obviously it was going to be colorful and like completely different, also breaking these aesthetics of because that's something really beautiful from the area where I am. For example, you have a monument to the puma, you have monument to the, for example, of a guy cultivating corn, with a corn. And not only that, the people that are being, let's say, recognized in public space is not only like heroes like Micaela Bastidas or Tupac Amaru, but then also you have the daily life being recognized in public space. And you have, for example, monkeys in monuments, you have pineapples in monuments, you have fruits. There is a plaza going to Cerro de Pasco that is called La Plaza de la Maca. That is a route that is really important in that area, and they cultivate that route. And it has a whole plaza and a huge maca in the middle. No, so and then the other thing that I think is really interesting of this type of monuments is that they are colorful. Like aesthetically, they don't have this grayness. They are not many times made of metal, which is a really industrial, no, that needs all this process of exploitation and extractivism, etc., in order to exist, no?
Okay.
This is wonderful.
Yeah, it's really wonderful.
We hope we get chosen.
Yeah, I think, Daniela, is not just the idea of the representation is one thing that changes the values. At the same time, it's some kind of feminist point of view about this statue that you are proposing to New York, no? Because when you try to put everyday life in this place, no, it's not the battle, it's not the, the blood, it's another thing, it's the life. No,
and
it's
for
like...
me also was really important to put people resting, because also it has to do, I mean, the level of exhaustion of migrant people in the context of Europe, not only because of work, because of being illegalized, having a process of asking or renewing a residency permit is a process of destroying you physically and emotionally. And like, I think there is a need also to ask for that space of resting from that level of pressure, no?
Okay. They are saying to me that we have to finish. I would like to hear from you some kind of considerations about this, maybe a resume to someone that maybe start later. How, if you have to respond to all status must fall, you say yes or not, and how they must fall. You already answered the question, but I will want to hear again, just to resume. It's not necessary to answer yes or not. And I think you say a lot of things. I think the importance of doing alliances, the importance of the work of the artists, the importance of the politics and the political resistance. There's a lot of work together to change the public sphere, not just the public sphere, I understand, to change the societies. We are talking about change the societies, not just the public sphere. No, I understand. I don't know who wants to start.
Yann, go ahead.
Well, this was a long conversation of like an hour and a half. I won't be able to summarize it in like 2 sentences. But what I can say is that that this discussion is taking place and that I can learn, or we can learn, from Daniela's work is already something. And to say that all statues must, all colonial patriarchal statues must fall. Yes. Afterwards, maybe artists will erect new statues, just like this project that you had for New York, which I think is wonderful. But at the same time, we need stories, and we need stories of people who are living racist marginalization, discrimination, and living this on a daily basis, and to listen to their stories, and so that their stories are also like put out in the public sphere and listened to. And this happens not only with a symbol, like people resting in front of the Museum of Natural History. It also happens with testimonies, with going to those kind of conferences and developing projects that put forward witnesses. It also comes to reparations and to listening to groups such as the Herero and Namas from Namibia, who have been asking for reparations from Germany for decades now. And those negotiations are still taking place, whereas everyone is asking themselves, why are these negotiations still taking place? Why is there no apology, for example? And all these struggles are linked to each other, and you need to play on all levels, to position your allies in different places so that something changes at some point.
Yeah, I think we need to rest, but we also need to work every day a lot. And there is a lot of work to be done. And for that, there is a lot of people needed. And not only in the case, for example, of white Europeans, they don't only need to listen, but they also need to take action. Maybe not the action that they think they have to take, which is like to be in front of everything, like they have, it has happened, but there is a lot of work to do on let's say, on the back, no? From basic support, economical support, not only giving money to anti-colonial, anti-racist organizations, but also, for example, thinking of institutions in the context of Europe. I have been working with those institutions, and 99% of the people who work there are white. And that's not only the content that we are going to create and the perspective you're going to put, but also where the resources of that public money is going, no? Who has a job and who, or for example, even seeing art shows about the colonization with all pure white Spanish artists, no? And in pure white Spanish museums, and they are grabbing all the knowledges, all the work that is being done by anti-racist and anti-colonial groups, not taking any risk, and then profiting out of that, no? So I think also there is a lot of work to be done in the daily life, from getting married, for having the papers. That's the way that I had my papers and that I lived in Europe for many years, because a good friend in an anti-racist act got married with me, to supporting different networks in different levels. And then also, I think in the case of migrant and racialized people, I think it's really important that we see South, that we see that our path has to be, let's say, signed by the struggles in the South. The way we do politics, the way we understand these struggles have to be seen. In my case, for example, what is going on in Navia Yala, like as I mentioned many times, the Zapatistas, the Mapuches, the people in Cauca, etc. And like as I said, like just to work a lot. That's my final, because those monuments, as you mentioned, no, like we have to take care who is going to go, who is going to remove, who to tear it down, how to take care of the people that are going to take the risk of tearing that down. I luckily, after what happened to me, that happened from one day to another, I had a lot of support from a big group of support people that sustained not only the situation of living, no, and the whole process of living, because it happened in 4 days that I took the decision, and there was a flight, and it was really everything really fast. But even, for example, I left all my things in Europe, no, my clothes, my cats, and I have my friend Luis, who I thank him a lot for taking care of my cat. I have Jose that has been supporting me a lot during this process in daily life, and that's also been doing politics many times, no? To pick up a box of clothes of someone that has had to leave running, or marrying someone. Sometimes it's not so glamorous, no? Making the revolution is more simple, no?
Personal es político, as I say. Okay, thank you very much, two of you, Yann and Daniela. Thank you very much, Get Institute, Fundazione Sandretto, to all the people that are working to this festival, and see you, I don't know when, but maybe in this struggle, no? In this long struggle. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.